Welcome back. It may seem like a new topic, but we're really just focusing on soundness and validity again. Sorry. We're dealing with deductive argument. Deductive argument has an abstract major premise. Validity has to do with the logic of stepping from one premise to the next. Soundness has to do with accepting the premises and the logic as valid. So far, so good. Should you have questions on these, of course, ask me anytime. I'd be glad to try and clarify them. Stop by my office. I'd be glad to talk to you about them. Let's continue on, though. We'll take another example. Here's our new topic. A statement from a former Attorney General, which seems kind of surprising because he was an Attorney General, but let's take the statement as read. The Supreme Court's Miranda ruling, he said in an interview, and we might remember that the Miranda ruling gives defendants the right to have a lawyer present during questioning, is wrong and only helps guilty defendants. Suspects who are innocent of a crime should be able to have a lawyer present before police questioning. But the thing is, you don't have many suspects who are innocent of a crime. That's contradictory. If a person is innocent of a crime, then he is not a suspect. So far, so good. Take a close look at the writing. We're going to reduce it to a few premises. There should be something about the writing that makes you ask, what? We'll reduce it to a few sentences. Let's see if I've got it. Guilty suspects do not deserve lawyers. If you were questioned by the police, you must be a guilty suspect. Therefore, those who are questioned by police don't deserve lawyers. The questions surrounding these, of course, are, is it valid? Is it sound? That's kind of a complex paragraph, a little bit of a complex argument, so we'll take it a little apart and think about it here. Guilty suspects don't deserve lawyers. If you were questioned by the police, you must be a guilty suspect. Therefore, those who are questioned by police don't deserve lawyers. What I would do, of course, is number these statements so that you get them in a kind of order and think about them and how they relate to each other. What is the abstract rule here? It really does help to identify the key major premises, and all I've done here is rearrange the sentences so that the first sentence turns out to be, if you were questioned by the police, you must be a guilty suspect. Now I've got all of my sentences lined up. The abstract one's the first one, and the second one follows from it. And then the third one has to be the conclusion. Sometimes with deductive arguments, you have to rearrange the writing so that you can get them in an order that makes sense to the argument. Okay. I haven't really changed anything materially. I've just shrunk it here so that we can take a close look at it. If you were questioned by the police, you must be a guilty suspect. Okay. Let's take a hypothetical. Now, these are all hypothetical. I'm not trying to accuse anybody in class. You were questioned by the police. I'm giving a specific. Since you were questioned by the police, you must be a guilty suspect, right? Therefore, you don't deserve a lawyer because guilty suspects don't deserve lawyers. The argument so far is valid in that we're going step by step. We're going step through the thing if we apply it to you. But it's unsound. Can you tell why it's unsound? Can you see what the problem is, what the potential problem? If you don't, I'll hint at it. It has to occur early on in the argument, in this case, for it to be unsound. And you have to think about the major premise and whether you accept it. But the validity of it is okay, step by step. That's a straightforward argument. You want to be able to think about whether you can explain why, because the explanation calls upon you to apply the vocabulary of deductive argument, and that's why we're doing this. Let's try a new one. You do get a lawyer. You must not be a guilty suspect. Does it follow that if you do get a lawyer, you must not be guilty? Look at that third sentence. We're reversing the negative on that third sentence. Therefore, those who are questioned by police don't deserve lawyers. Okay. So if you do get a lawyer, if we go back through to the beginning, it must be that you're not a guilty suspect based on the second sentence. Sorry, not to the beginning, but to the second sentence. It's actually using the logic here, and because it's using negation, you can say it is valid. It is because you're negating that third and really the second sentence, and because you're doing that, you're pointing out how it couldn't be true that you would be a guilty suspect. Still unsound, though. Same reason as before. Do we know why yet? Have you been able to figure out why? In this one, you want to focus on the validity by looking at the last two pieces in the conclusion here. Let's try one more. Same set of premises, same conclusion. You are not questioned by the police. You do get a lawyer. Are we given a rule for those who are not questioned by the police? Of course, the answer is no. We're not given a rule for that. We can't conclude that you do get a lawyer, and therefore the logic here is invalid because we don't have actually logic or any kind of rule for this. It's still unsound, this original set of statements. Try one more. You don't deserve a lawyer. That seems to affirm the third and concluding sentence of this set of statements. You don't deserve a lawyer. Can we work backwards, though, and say that you must be a guilty suspect? Is that how the logic works? Can we go in reverse? Think back to Alan and to our example in the other video. No, this one's invalid, too, because unless we're negating the conclusion, we can't work backwards. We don't have a rule for what happens when we don't deserve a lawyer. We only have a rule set up for if we're questioned by the police and being a guilty suspect. It could be the case that the rule is also set up for not deserving a lawyer, but we can't affirm the consequent in this particular example. It's still unsound. It would seem to be more important to be valid in these four examples, but that's not the case. What we're trying to do is apply the vocabulary to understand validity and soundness in argument. In all of the examples, you can see that they're unsound. Let's try and figure out why they're unsound and take another kind of example altogether. If we restate the argument, if you were a suspect, then you are guilty, which is kind of a shortening and tightening up of that thinking that Edwin Meese started this all out with. We could have even applied it to crazy examples like Kris Kringle, for those who still watch old movies. Kris Kringle was a suspect in the movie Miracle on 34th Street. He's a suspect, and therefore Kris Kringle is guilty and doesn't deserve a lawyer, which isn't what happens in the movie necessarily. Yes? Why would that be valid? Because it follows the rule. In fact, it calls the rule into question. How can that rule be right? Being a suspect does not mean that you're guilty, in other words. In this case, all I'm trying to say is that oftentimes you'll have an argument thrown out as valid, thrown out into the world as valid. They want you to examine the validity of the argument because what they're trying to draw attention to is the unsound premises that's at its core. It is unsound to treat suspects as if they are guilty and undeserving of lawyers. And that's the key thing that people will want to question if they're looking at the unsound premise in this argument. Why is it that we assume that suspects are guilty? Why is it that it's supposed to follow that they don't get lawyers? It's because Edwin Meese is wrong. What he's trying to say is wrong, and he got called on it, and it's a good thing too, because you cannot have the forces of justice in our society working on the principle that people who are suspect and questioned by the police are all guilty and undeserving of lawyers. To sum up, if a major premise is untrue in a deductive argument and the reasoning invalid, the whole argument is said to be unsound. If the logical premises follow one right after another in logical order, the argument is said to be valid. So valid and sound arguments, we examine them because they're ways of describing deductive arguments and making sense of how they work and the assumptions that they're based on. If the argument goes one step to the next and it goes in logical order, we say that it's valid. If it violates that, we say it's invalid. If we don't accept the premises and the logic seems invalid, then we say it's unsound. An argument has to satisfy both soundness and validity in order to work, in other words. And in fact, we've seen good examples of this. We come back to the centerpieces, the ones that are unlike Ed Meese that started this little video out with. These are ones that have been accepted by our society and by our culture. Do you remember these from our readings? Because we took a look at them in some detail in class. Can you identify the deductive arguments from their sound major premises? such as we declare these truths to be self-evident. At the time, they were asking the world to accept that premise as a sound premise, and so too with these others. We the people do ordain, another part of that same declaration, hint, hint. Or how about this next one? We means me. Are women persons? We the people, she says. Maybe you recognize that one, where she declares that the we doesn't just mean property men. It means women too. It's something about the boat. It's declared sound in part because it's warranted as decided by the populace that hears the speech. And it has to actually happen over the period of time that people buy into the argument, accept it, and then eventually vote on it. Or how about the argument that we would have treated in class that we need to be dedicated to their cause. We need to be dedicated to their cause. Or that an unjust law is. It was a little bit more obscure, but if you can think back to our discussions and examples in the readings in class, you might notice how these are the deductive sound major premises that we have used to demonstrate how deductive logic works. Alright, this is abstract reasoning, and I'm not trying to overwhelm folks. When you do get questions, come and talk to me. I'd be glad to try and answer questions or work through something that was raised in the video that you'd like further clarification on. Good luck.